So routinely with my job, I talk to my patients about diaphragmatic breathing and why it's important to how they feel and how they're going to be able to get better. So I was asked to put it on video so that it could be explained to family members when they're sitting on the floor working on the breathing and taking a little bit of flack about, what do you mean you're not breathing? You're there, you're alive, aren't you, right? So I want you to know that when we talk about breathing from a rehabilitation point of view or a performance point of view, we're really talking about how you're breathing. It's a movement pattern, how air gets in and how air gets out. So obviously you're breathing if you're alive here, but how the air gets in you can be either efficient or inefficient. I often use the example of walking. If someone walks across the floor very gracefully, they're walking. If someone is limping across the floor, they're walking. They're just doing it very inefficiently, and that comes at a cost. So let's talk about normal breathing for a moment with the diaphragm. So hopefully you can see this. The diaphragm is, when it's relaxed, dome-shaped, and it more or less cuts us into a top and bottom half. So it's going to be like that. So when we inhale, that muscle pulls downward. And so therefore our chest cavity gets bigger, abdominal cavity gets smaller, and air comes in on a vacuum. It's very elastic. And so when you relax, it just it springs back and exhale happens. Kind of like a slingshot. There's energy this way, and then when you let go, it just goes like that. So it's just like that, okay? That's how breathing is super efficient when we use our diaphragm. Now, I often use the analogy of dominoes. There's other dominoes that fall if you tip over the very first domino. So the very first domino for having normal core stability is your diaphragmatic breathing pattern. And here's why it works. You might remember when you go to the doctor and they have that little tap of the hammer to test a reflex in your arm or your leg or somewhere. Well, that's a reflex, meaning you don't think about it, it just naturally happens, because with the hammer, they provided a very short, quick stretch, and your muscles reflexively in response to that have a short, quick response. They twitch, okay? Well, if it's a slow, steady stretch, it's a slow, steady tension. So when I inhale like that, and my diaphragm expands that way, so it'll be down and outward, then I'm providing slow, steady stretch to the muscles on my lower half. So all the muscles at the bottom of my pelvis, referred to as a group as the pelvic floor, all of those muscles now are going to be on, so to speak, because of the tension of my inhale. And then I'm also expanding in, forward, backward, and outward. So in addition to my pelvic floor turning on as a result of a diaphragmatic breath, so too is the innermost part of my abdominal wall. So the abs that we all love to look at on the beach have layers. And the innermost layer is a muscle called the transverse abdominis. And so if I inhale deeply, I'm going to actually put a little stretch on that transverse abdominis, which again, that makes it, in response, create a little tension. So it's on, so to speak. Muscles opposite that in the back are referred to as the multifidi. That group too will be on. So the mere act of breathing diaphragmatically means the top, the bottom, the front, and the back of this little cylinder here that we all call our core will be relatively on, if you will. And so now, whether I'm thinking about it or not, whether I'm ready for some forced act upon me or not, I have a certain amount of muscle tone protecting me. So it's kind of walking around with a bulletproof vest on. I have some reassurance that if something were to occur to me, I have some protection. So that's why we care on the lower half. On the upper half, we care because if I'm not breathing with my diaphragm, I'm breathing with something. And so those muscles that substitute are going to live up here. Muscles that attach from my neck, shoulder blade, chest, they are going to be essentially trying to lift all of this up so my chest will allow air to come down. And so if I'm breathing with this, it's going to create artificial tightness around my neck and shoulders. And so if you have chronic neck tightness, chronic shoulder tightness, chronic headache, all of those things are often contributed to, if not entirely, because of your breathing pattern. Now you might ask, why on earth would I breathe up here? Is because we breathe that way as a response to stress. And if you go back to whenever it was that humans were first walking on this earth, stress meant something was trying to eat you, or you were trying to eat something else because you were hungry and there was no other food around. That was the stress. And whether it ended well or ended not so well for you, that stress was over quickly. And so our bodies in now the modern world respond to stress in the exact same way. But our stressors linger. So if I'm worried about my bills, they're still there tomorrow. And if I'm worried about my whack neighbor, or if I'm worried about my job, or if I'm worried about the economy, if I'm worried about the environment, if I'm worried about, there's a lot of things to be worried about, All of those things create the same physiological response in my body as it would have a million years ago if I was trying to run away from a dinosaur. So that means there's perpetual reason for my body to feel like I'm in a fight or flight situation. So if I believe I'm in a fight or flight situation, I'm going to respond that way. Now keep in mind, I know and you know that I know that you don't think your bills are a life and death matter, but your primitive brain responds in the exact same way as if it is. So it's not like we have this little stress response when it's a bill or a crazy neighbor or whatever versus a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's the same response. There's one of them, and that stress response changes the blood chemistry and our muscles and our breathing pattern and our skin and our eyes and all sorts of things change as a result. So with our modern stressors, we have chronic reason why this might be, or even if you're like the most chill person ever, if you slip and fall, that hurts, that's stressful. If something bad happens to you, you get in a car accident, that's stressful. And so those things sometimes will alter your breathing pattern. And so we look to help people to understand why that matters and give them a skill set on try to reestablish it. That'll be another video, but I hope you recognize from this how breathing is such a normal human function when it happens with your diaphragm. It's still a normal human function when it happens up here, but this should be every once in a while, not every day over and over again because of lots of things when some jerk cuts you off in traffic or whatever. So try to breathe here. Generally speaking, if you breathe through your nose, it'll be more inclined to be a diaphragmatic breath. But if you find yourself mouth breathing a lot, if you find yourself out here, if you find yourself holding your breath a lot, if you hear yourself making sounds like that as you're exerting yourself, those are signs. And so see somebody to help you, or wait around for the next video when we talk about some strategies of how to normalize this process. I hope you found that useful, and thank you for listening.